Hello and welcome to the debate on Sky News. I'm Niall Paterson. Here's our take on developments brought together from America, the UK and around the world. Does anyone know what's happening? The US demands greater transparency in the Washington Post trial in Iran. Ethics, morals, even values. Can we actually trust our politicians? Well, let's start with Iran, and here's what little we do know. The trial is now underway of the Washington Post bureau chief in Tehran. Jason Rezaian has been imprisoned for 10 months, and his Iranian wife has been denied access to the courtroom. The judge dealing with the case has been described as the judge of death. But there has been a distinct lack of clarity as to the charges, let alone the evidence being brought to support them. Well, as usual, we are joined by the Democrat commentator Jeffrey Robinson live in New York and the Conservative commentator Armstrong Williams joining us from Washington. Jeffrey, to you first. How worried should we be about this?
Very, very worried. Iran under the mullahs has this terribly cruel habit of doing things in secret, of executing people, of treating people unfairly, of violating all sorts of civil rights. It is an extremely worrying situation. And there is precedent for worry. I point to the fact that my old pal, my dear buddy, Bobby Levinson, the former FBI agent who was gone missing in Quiche Island in Iran, has been missing for over 8 years. And the Iranians have never once said anything. I mean, the cruelty that they have inflicted on Bobby's wife, Christina, and the 7 children and grandchildren is unbelievable. And I can say this about the Iranians. Cruelty in the name of religion is the ultimate blasphemy.
Armstrong, it is a favoured tactic of particular regimes that when they have a beef with a particular country, one thing they can always do is fling their journalists in jail.
You'd think if Iran was sincere about really negotiating and turning over a new leaf, especially after the change of power in that country, this would be a fine example. It's one thing to charge someone over legitimate charges when there's real espionage, which we've seen throughout the world. But all Jason was doing is communicating the fact that we can help you build relationships with Iran, typically what anybody would do in offering their services. And they use this tripped up communications to say nothing. And so they can just at will put anyone with any Iranian lineage or connection to that country in jail at will and do with what they want. I mean, just think about this. This guy has had no access to medical services or to his lawyer. He only met his lawyer within the last couple of weeks, or the last day or so, in preparation of this kangaroo court trial that he's about to go through. So obviously there's nothing there. They don't need to tell anyone. So the question you ask, how do you even begin to negotiate someone with that kind of mentality who can just randomly take someone like you, Neil, a Jeffrey off the streets, if they determine they want to use you for some negotiation chip and just throw you in jail and just keep you there for 10 or 12 months. And like Jeffrey just said about his friend, for 8 years without a word. It says everything we need to know about their country, their mentality, and why they're isolating themselves from the rest of the world.
Gentlemen, back to you in just a second, but let's get a fresh perspective on this. Dr. Mehrdad Khonsari is a former Iranian diplomat now living in London. Dr. Khonsari, thanks very much for joining us. What is your assessment of exactly what is going on here?
Well, I think you have to make a distinction between the government and the judiciary in Iran, which is dealing with Jason's case. The judiciary, run by the conservatives and the hardline clerics, is a state upon itself, and it is part of the domestic struggle that is going on between reformers, people who have tried to champion a different way forward by, for example, negotiating over the nuclear deal, and those people who want to hold on to the relics of the last 36 years. So this part of Jason's unfortunate problem has to do with the domestic struggle that's going on within Iran. And this trial addresses some of those issues, particularly since those elements, the hardline elements who have not been in favor of reaching a nuclear agreement with the United States and the 5+1, find themselves in a bad situation and have nurtured this over the past 10 months in order to try and flex their muscles and to address their domestic audiences and to say that they have not lost all.
So, Dr. Khonsari, I want to make sure that I understand you correctly. Despite the fact that, of course, the Iranian office of the office of the Iranian president does carry some sway within the state, there are these competing elements within the Iranian government that have essentially conspired to put a person in jail to try and take the wheels off that oil deal. Sorry, not the oil deal, the nuclear deal that we've already got to a preliminary agreement on.
Well, I think you can't put it as clear cut. You can't put this proposition in the very clear-cut manner that you did, but certainly it has something to do with that. The judiciary considers itself an independent authority, just like, for example, the judiciary, the separation of powers. So it says that I am entitled and I have my own authority to do various things, and I'm prosecuting because of these reasons. Now, I don't think that at the end of the day, something terrible is going to happen to Jason.
President Obama, up until this point, has refused to link the nuclear deal on the table to the plight of this Washington Post journalist. I mean, was that a mistake?
No, sir, absolutely not. We do not negotiate with terrorists and who hold our people hostages. We can see that formula goes nowhere. It brings about even more problems. It shows you that you're willing to bend for a price. The president is absolutely correct in holding to that principle. I would challenge something that your guest has said. He indicated in what he was stating that no harm has come to Jason yet. I would challenge you by saying anybody locked up in an Iranian jail for 10 months away from their family, every hour harm is done to them. You take away their freedom, the thing that separates us from the rest of the world.
Jeffrey, we are in a very difficult situation. I mean, when you hear Dr. Khonsari saying, it is very difficult to negotiate with these individuals, they are a separate part of the government, they appear unlikely to want to listen to anything. I mean, what ultimately can be done?
Well, wait a minute. I take exception as well with something Dr. Khonsari said about the fact that the judiciary is its own person or its own entity. It's not. It answers to the mullahs. It answers to the hard right wing of the mullahs. And nothing gets done in that country without the mullahs saying, yes, it's okay. So that the whole idea that the judiciary is acting on its own is not true. It's doing the bidding of the hardcore right wing mullahs. Now, and Armstrong is absolutely right. You don't negotiate with terrorists. And every minute that poor young man is in prison, he is being tortured. He is being treated very, very cruelly and denied his civil rights. But I would say one other thing. Some friends of mine from Hollywood went on a junket to Iran as part of a film cooperation thing, and what they found in Tehran and in Isfahan and in other cities were a population completely at odds with the government, a population that was terribly literate, that liked America, that was very open and very happy to say what they could, and they knew where those lines were. I mean, for example, the mullahs have outlawed satellite television throughout Iran. And yet, on every building you see, there are satellite television dishes. So they know that some laws just are not going to be enforced. But when you get the judiciary on its high horse doing the bidding of the right-wing mullahs, then you have a real problem. And until you sort that out, this country will never, ever, ever evolve out of the 7th century mentality that the mullahs have put it in.
Dr. Khonsari, I mean, what actually can then be done to secure the release of Jason when, as Jeffrey points out, there is this schism between the majority and those hardliners?
First of all, I don't think that what I said differs from the interpretation which one of your guests just gave right now. The judiciary is independent. It's an independent branch of the government. It answers to the mullahs because the head of the judiciary has been appointed by the supreme leader. And as I said, it acts against the government that has been elected by the people, and the people whom one of your guests described as being essentially pro-Western, Western-friendly, and totally different in mentality and in composure to the kind of actions that we're seeing. But when you talk about, putting emotions aside, because this is an emotional issue, and I can understand why your commentators, feel emotionally for this. But putting emotions aside, this is not a case that you're dealing with terrorists. You are dealing with a situation that a journalist who has sought to go to work in Iran, knowing in advance that Iran is what it is. All the things that your commentators are saying were well known to him and to everybody else for a long period of time. So he chose to go there, and now he's being sort of tried on probably trumped up charges to which he has to answer. Now, there is a process and a method that has to be followed through. When I said no harm, in my opinion, will come to him, is not, as one of your guests said, that of course he has suffered. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that at the end of the day, I don't think he's going to be punished for espionage, and some sort of arrangement will eventually come around which will let him sort of leave Iran in one piece. In other words, I don't think that any physical harm will come to him in the end, and I hope that I am right. But the fact is that you do not negotiate with terrorists, but you do exert pressure on Iran, on the judiciary, through public opinion, by saying that try to make this more expensive for the Iranian authorities to go through with this. You have to bear in mind that, for example, somebody like Mr. Zarif, the Iranian foreign minister, is not on the side of the judiciary. President Rouhani, they say that we don't know. We are very sorry that this has happened, but this is out of our hands because they are an independent body. Now, Iran works in a particular way, and you have to bear that in mind. And otherwise, you might say random sloganeering is not going to get anywhere.
Dr. Mehrdad Khonsari, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
You can catch up with the Sky News debate on Apple TV, Roku, on Catch Up, and, of course, on skynews.com/US. But moving on, fraud, corruption, transparency, terms you'd usually associate with third world politics. But with just 18 months until the US presidential elections, how stretched are the morals and ethics in Washington? Well, let's speak to Dan Schwager, the former staff director and chief counsel of the House and Senate Select Committees on Ethics, and ably capable of dealing with this. It's difficult to imagine a time, Mr. Schwager, that politicians in the United Kingdom and in the United States have been held in such low regard. What's to be done?
Well, I think they are trying to make great efforts forward with transparency and with holding themselves and each other accountable in their peer reviews. The Constitution says that Congress has to police itself, and they try to do that, and they try different steps, and they try to be transparent. But I think what the public wants, and there are lots of groups that feed on this and lots of industries that feed on this, the public wants the great scandal. They want to believe the worst of their politicians. They want to believe that everybody but the person they voted for is a scoundrel, quote unquote. And the facts don't really bear that out.
Part of the problem, Mr. Schwager, is not just the fact that politicians are seen ultimately to be policing themselves, policing themselves to an extent, but the politicians simply don't help themselves. I think of perhaps the most recent example, those members of Congress that took a trip to Baku in Azerbaijan for a conference. Turns out they were there thanks to the funding of the state oil company of Azerbaijan, and at the same time, whilst they're receiving gifts of rugs worth thousands of dollars. I mean, do you have to be a politician? You don't have to be a politician to see that perhaps doesn't give exactly the best impression.
Well, first of all, putting aside the rugs and the kind of situation that you're in when you're a public official and you're in a diplomatic situation and you're in a diplomatic setting, the very point that you're using this trip as an example of how politicians just can't help themselves. This was a fact-finding mission to a foreign country with energy issues, with important foreign relations implications, and a lot of members and a bunch of staff from our legislative body traveled over there. They did it not on the public dime, but they did it in a way that they understood to be fully in compliance with the rules that have been set up. And I think it's very important for our members of Congress and for their staff to be educated, to be informed, and fact-finding missions such as this are extremely legitimate. Now, what it appears from the press and from the leak of a report is that it might be the case that the sponsor gave misinformation to the members, the travelers, and to the ethics committee that approves this trip. And if that's the case, that is not something that should be tarring the integrity and the reputation of these members and staff. It is something that should be addressed. And, you know, there is a lot of public disclosure about these trips. There is a lot of review about all of these trips. There are a lot of rules about these trips that are complicated and that people work hard to get right. But when it turns out that somebody has been given misinformation and it turns out that the sponsors may not have been on the up and up, all of a sudden we tar all of the members and the staffers who went to try and get some fact-finding done so that they can make better policy and they can review our own foreign policy in a more informed manner. And that's unfortunate that they get tarred with that, but it's a product of this craving for scandal that we seem to have.
Jeffrey Robinson, it does speak volumes, though, doesn't it, that the source of this leaked report is commonly held in Washington at the moment to be the Office of Congressional Ethics itself.
Wait a minute. I mean, this is obviously an intelligent young man, but my goodness, is he confused. And to be an apologist for ethical violations is quite incredible, considering the office he holds. No. First of all, Robinson's rule: the minute a public official blames the press, you know the bastard's guilty. Unequivocal. Second of all, what do you mean forget the rugs? You can't forget the rugs. They're taking gifts and they're being sponsored by people who have a commercial interest in bending their opinion. Wait a minute. People who are not registered, by the way, as lobbyists. No. Junkets, the political junkets, when a politician, a congressman or a senator goes on a junket, a fact-finding mission, and takes his golf clubs, his swimming trunks, and his 22-year-old secretary, what a bunch of crap that is. No. This has to be cleaned up, and seriously cleaned up, not just painted over the cracks. I'm sorry, but the public, if they have a jaundiced view of politicians, it's because politicians have earned their jaundiced view. Armstrong, have you been on any junkets recently?
You know what? I actually cringe listening to Dan Schwager. I cringe. Because, you know, I don't know if you know anything about my history and No Child Left Behind, where I took a contract from the Department of Education to promote No Child Left Behind. It was disclosed, but I almost lost my career. I literally almost lost my career. So I can speak on this. Let me just tell you why I cringe at Dan is that he is the problem. Because they are so blinded and so isolated from the rest of America that and it's not his fault. He's been so much of this culture, he doesn't see anything wrong with it. In fact, when he said, forget about the rugs, I almost had to blind myself. I could not believe it, but he doesn't get it. The bottom line is, what do you expect? They had laws where insider trading was okay. They go into the Congress worth $100,000 or $200,000, and in a few years' time, they'll become millionaires. They pass laws like civil rights laws and other laws that Americans have to adhere to, but the members of Congress don't have to adhere to themselves. It is so maddening listening to him to realize why the American people find Congress and gives it the lowest approval rating of any body, of any of these entities, the three branches of government. It's why, because they've become so blinded for their own greed, protecting their members. They feel the laws that apply to the John Q. public should not apply to them. And it's just sad listening to him because he's here trying to defend it. It shows you how out of touch Congress is with this country, and especially the staff members who are their enablers.
Mr. Schwager, I suppose you could argue that those at the top themselves aren't exactly setting a fantastic example. I think of Hillary Clinton using a personal email account to send work emails, let alone her husband's rather fluid definition of what sexual relations are.
Look, there's no question that, as I said, image is a problem, and the public wants to see a very high standard and a very high level, and the members need to take that into account. But, you know, before I worked on the Hill, I was a corruption prosecutor, and I prosecuted a lot of public officials. And I don't remember any crime having an element of, if you blame the press, you're guilty. That's just not accurate. And to say that there were ethical violations by these members when the sponsor may have lied is not accurate. And when I said forget the rugs, I didn't mean you should paste over them, but we were talking about the issue of what is the problem here. Look, some of the members did exactly the right thing with the rugs. I don't know if any of the others didn't. We don't know the facts yet. And so to say that there are ethical violations here is wrong. And when Armstrong Williams, for instance, says there were laws that approved of insider trading or allowed insider trading, that is wrong. Your facts are just wrong. And so it's impossible not to point out misinformation.
My facts are not wrong. You guys were allowed to do insider trade until you changed your rules. It is true. You had to change the rules because of the public outcry.
Point to a single law that ever said members of Congress are allowed to engage in insider trading. It doesn't exist. It's a myth. And it's a myth that's perpetuated because people like scandal.
Listen, there was a time when members of Congress could buy stocks and companies before it was released to the public until somebody got wind of it and said, listen, this is not right. There is something wrong with this picture. Are you kidding me? Of course. That's why they had to pass the laws in the first place.
Members of Congress have never been allowed to engage in insider trading. Whether or not they have done so is a matter for investigation. Now, you might want to talk about the speech or debate clause. I'm not being an apologist for the Constitution that has the speech or debate clause. If you want to amend the Constitution, that's fine. So being able to prosecute them is one thing. But members of Congress have never been allowed to engage in insider trading, and to suggest they have is wrong. Now, what did they do when that allegation was made on 60 Minutes, despite people like me trying to say that it wasn't, that 60 Minutes was wrong? Well, Congress responded to the will of the people, the desire and the pressure that they get to pass laws to look like they're addressing things that were never actually a problem. And the reason they need to do that is because of this misinformation that's being put out there. And then they do have to address the reality. Jeffrey's absolutely right. They are hurting themselves. They are missing the perception. And so they address a perception that's not based on fact. But that's not blaming the media and acknowledging guilt by pointing out misinformation.
Jeffrey, Dan Schwager has a point there, does he not? That politics suffers from a bit of an image problem at the moment. When you think of politics, we're not thinking of the West Wing anymore. We're thinking of House of Cards.
Absolutely wrong. Dan Schwager has just won the award for being the only guest on this program who has completely, totally, 1,000% united Armstrong and me. We are in absolute lockstep on this one, and he's the only guest to have ever done it. Because when Dan Schwager says image is the problem, he doesn't get it. Image is not the problem. Greed, avarice, self-importance, ego is the problem. And until his office starts cracking down on that, it will continue. You cannot be an apologist and hold that job. Sorry, Dan.
Dan, your response.
Yeah, well, I would suggest that you can't get facts wrong and hold the job that you guys have. And for instance, I've watched a bunch of your programs and I really enjoy it when you two are united, and it happens quite a bit that you two get united against guests. So even those little bit of facts, it makes for great television. It makes for great scandal. But you got to get the facts right if you're going to accuse people of ethical violations. If you're going to accuse people of corruption, of ego, of greed, of avarice, you have to get your facts right.
Okay, Dan, let's state the facts. How long have you been in this job?
I was a former staff director and chief counsel of the House Ethics Office and a counsel in the Senate Ethics Office.
As staff director, as former counsel and staff director, how many successful prosecutions for ethics violations did you orchestrate?
You can read the very lengthy annual or end of Congress report.
No, I'm asking you. Just give me a number. No, don't push the question away. Just give me a number. How many successful prosecutions did you oversee?
Well, first of all, the committees don't actually prosecute. If you're talking about how many times did we cite violations and did we report on conduct and did we report on improvements?
That ended in successful prosecutions.
Well, I'm not. Again, you're confusing terms, and so I don't know what you mean by ending in successful prosecution.
The answer is zero. You're playing all sorts of legal games. You're playing semantics. The answer is zero. You did nothing while you were there. You turned a blind eye because you don't understand the problem. Image is not the problem. It's absolutely ethical greed
while we were there.
Mr. Schwager, I just want to try and bring this back to the general point about political corruption. I mean, I was mentioned a moment ago the shift in the public psyche away from the West Wing to something like House of Cards. Is there something inherent in the system that encourages, if not outright fraud, then certainly Machiavellian behaviour?
I don't know if there's anything necessarily in the system that encourages fraud. I think the system does encourage a lot of appearances of conflict. Armstrong himself referred to, his allegations against him in the past about appearances of conflict and conflicts of interest. There certainly is something in the system where you have to raise as much money as you do, where the lobbyists are allowed to be as involved as they are in how you raise money. That absolutely creates a horrible appearance and encourages what many, many people consider to be conflicts of interest. But there is great divide in this country. The Supreme Court doesn't believe in corruption. At least half the Supreme Court doesn't believe that corruption exists. Justice Scalia, in his dissent in 1990 to a case outlawing patronage, said patronage is a great part of our American system. So there is certainly a lot within our system, I would agree, that encourages appearances of conflicts and perhaps actual conflicts.
If I can say this, look, we're not here to attack Dad. I respect that he believes what he's saying. And look, appearance and allegations are not always reality. I'll be the first to admit that. But I'll tell you what I'm willing to do, because we're also here to learn, and especially as a broadcaster on the stations across the country now, I want to learn and do better. I'm going to go back and revisit this topic, because this is the first time that I'm hearing that what 60 Minutes reported about insiders trading was false. So I'm going to go back and do my homework, and hopefully we can revisit this conversation again.
Hopefully we can. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Mr. Schwager, first for your time, but second for getting these two to finally agree on something.
It's my pleasure. Happy to help.
Which is possibly an appropriate point to point out that you two will be back next week. For now, thanks both, Jeffrey and Armstrong.
Thank you.
And that's your lot for this edition of The Debate. You can continue watching Sky News on Apple TV, Roku, on Catch Up, and of course on skynews.com. But until next time, goodbye from me.